Hi, I'm Jeannette Sutton.
And I am Eddie Bertola. And welcome to another episode of the Alerting Authority. And as always, we encourage you to subscribe, follow, listen, and most importantly, participate in these podcasts. We appreciate all those who are listening via Apple or Spotify, or those that are watching on YouTube. And if you are watching or listening, again, please comment and let us know what you think. Any questions, concerns, ideas, problems, pain points. And I'd really love to hear some success stories. I know, Dr. Sutton would as well. See, I'm even throwing in the doctor for you today because we're talking with researchers. But we want the community of those that involved in the Alerting Authority to honestly just benefit from this so that we can all do our jobs a little bit better and make our communities safer. So with that said, Jeannette, who do we have on today?
I'm super excited. We talk about the RAND report all the time. In all of our presentations, every time we go out and do a training, when we talk about opting out and the success of WIAs, we talk about the RAND report. Well, today we are talking with the two leading authors of that report, and they are from the RAND Corporation. This is Rachel Steratore, is a policy researcher at RAND and professor in the RAND School of Public Policy. She studies how people interpret and trust artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, integrating cognitive research and systems thinking to improve risk communication and technology governance. She co-led the RAND study for FEMA on the effectiveness of wireless emergency alerts during the 2023 national test. And her colleague, Andy Parker, who is a senior behavioral scientist at RAND and professor in the RAND School of Public Policy. He studies how people make decisions in complex real-world environments, and he co-led the RAND study for FEMA on the reach of wireless emergency alerts during the 2023 national test. So together, they make an amazing team, and I'm so excited to welcome Rachel and Andy to our podcast.
And I will say, even though, we're having more PhDs on, don't take it as a bad thing. It's a great thing because they really, it's fun to see how they led it. Like, again, just Jeannette, as you said, the RAND study, we talk about it. We're not reading the study to you here. We're talking with the actual authors. And I just think that is something that's even more important. We're getting it from their view. I have to say, again, big thank you to our sponsors. HQE is sponsoring another episode, and we really appreciate it. HQE Systems is a disabled veteran-owned company. They're full-service alert origination software providers. They specialize in cutting-edge life safety and electronic security solutions. They can help provide solutions to the pain points in your notification process. They have the latest generation of outdoor warning sirens, indoor notifications, electronic mass notifications, and can control it all through one piece of software. I am super excited too, and I think we're going to talk about it. There's going to be things that I am probably going to ask questions on. And it's okay if you don't understand it all the first time. You may have to listen to this episode twice. But everything you're going to hear is super, super valuable.
To kick off our conversation, can you tell us, what is the RAND study?
Sure. Thanks, Jeannette, and thanks for having us. I appreciate the chance to talk with an audience that works, so closely with the systems every day, and to share, the insights that we gained from our study, which gave us an opportunity to look at, the wireless emergency alert system, or WIA, from the public's point of view. We don't often get to do that at scale, and so this was a really, exciting opportunity to do so. So, at a really high level, the United States uses a complex ecosystem of tools to alert the public to urgent situations, right? So those tools are operated at different levels. So federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies all have, a role in that ecosystem. And at the federal level, those capabilities are brought together under IPAWS, or the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. And one key component of that, so if you can imagine the Venn diagram happening, is the Wireless Emergency Alert System, or WIA, which is designed to deliver short, time-sensitive alerts directly to mobile phones in a specific geographic area. So WIA works using, cell broadcast technology. Messages are transmitted from cell towers to phones within the impacted area. Unlike, your traditional SMS text messages, these alerts use a dedicated broadcast channel that allows alerts to be geo-targeted and sent as, one-way messages, which, reduces the risk of network congestion during emergencies. I give that context to really understand what we were dealing with and the environment we were working in whenever we launched this study. And this study focused on what we often call the last mile of that system. So our study looked, at how the, alerts make it from the cell tower to the public. And right now, all we know is how things go through the technical infrastructure. So once the message leaves the tower, there's no automatic confirmation of what happens next. So we wanted to understand, how does that message actually reach people? And our objective was to assess the public's experience with the October 4th, 2023 nationwide WIA test. And we looked at, did you receive the alert, how that receipt varied by a variety of technical factors, geography, carrier, device, and by non-technical factors like age, language, and a variety of community characteristics. So we also looked at awareness and opt-out behavior. And to answer some of those questions, we used a really big nationally representative survey fielded immediately after that test. So that's at a high level the context and the objective and sort of an initial taste of how we started to address some of these questions.
No, I like it. And so to make it more, I would say even just less academic, essentially you guys tested and you looked at the perceptions of everyone after they received the national test, I guess in layman's terms, or?
We didn't even get to perception yet. So I think the perception question is a very good one, and one that we think should come as a follow-on to something like this. This was really trying to understand who even gets the alert. Like, what's the geographic reach of these alerts? Are they getting to people like we expect them to? And this was fielded in a 5-minute quick survey. So there's only so many questions we could ask them. And it was really, did you get the alert? Were you aware of alerts, what WIA was before this test alert came out? And have you opted out of any? And then a variety of individual level characteristics so we could sort of try to understand of how differences in that receipt or opt-out or awareness would have varied based on some of those factors. So we were even more foundational than that, Eddie, but it's a great point.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And I think it really goes to your point, and you mentioned it, of why the study was even done. Because to my knowledge, there had never been a study done like this.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any other way other than a study like this to really measure WIA enrollment, reception, opt-out rates, or the things that you guys were hitting on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So to answer the first one, why the study was done, despite WIA being used widely, there really is no administrative data set that can answer some very basic questions about, system performance in reaching people. So as I said, it's that one-way broadcast system. Phones don't send a return signal when an alert is received. And there's no centralized, record of who received the alert, who was aware beforehand, who opted out, of what types did they opt out. And those outcomes simply aren't observable through system logs. And because of that, public reporting, if you want to do on a national scale via surveys, is really the only scalable way to measure these things and get a sense of that scale. I was aware of some prior studies who had put people in different areas of the country with various device, settings and situations to sort of test this on an anecdotal basis. But as you stated, there has not been a comprehensive systematic evaluation following a live national test before.
It's also worth noting that this lack of a last mile return signal is due to a very intentional design, part of the design of the system. This wasn't a mistake on the part of the design. The one-way communication for the tower, the broadcast signal, as opposed to a traditional text message, which is a two-way communication with the tower, the one-way communication is a good way to hit everybody in an area very efficiently and be able to target what those areas are without clogging up. It's very efficient with bandwidth. And so in a time of emergency, the last thing you want to do is clog, if they had to text message each and every and get signals back and forth from each and every phone, it would really bog down the system. So that was part of the design, but the limitation of that is they just don't know if it reached the phones. And I would go even one step beyond that to say, even if it reached the phone, it's not clear whether the respondent realized that it had come through and what they were looking at. And so some of this question of receipt is also that link between the device and the person.
Mm-hmm. It's really important, the distinctions that you're making about broadcasting versus SMS. And it also speaks directly to some of the current concerns that the public has about, I got this message because somebody has my phone number, and all of the concerns around the test time where people were hiding their phones or putting them in the microwave, and all these other things that were going on, which is beyond the things we said we were going to talk about. But I just remember so many of those really interesting conversations about the testing at that time. But broadcast messaging means that no one has your phone number and no one's tracking you. And it's so difficult to know who got the message. We had to thousands and thousands of dollars to get this study.
A better metaphor is actually having a radio receiver. And as opposed to a text messaging, it looks like a text message on your phone. That's, I think, what draws, makes people worry about this. But the way that this technology is working is more as a radio receiver. If you have a radio and it's in an area and it's turned on and a signal comes through, it'll receive that. But there's nothing going from the radio back to the radio station. And it's more like that.
Thank you. That's a good way of describing it. I appreciate that. So you talked a little bit about the questions that you asked, but I know there were more things that you measured that went beyond the questions directly to the individuals who did the survey. So can you tell us a little bit more about what else you measured and how you measured things for your study?
I think that one was for Andy, if you wanted to kick off.
I apologize. You froze I froze for a minute there. So ask the question again and I'll try and answer it.
So with your study, what did you measure and how was it done?
Yeah. So it was done through an online survey. So people filled it out on a web-based survey, either on their phone or on a computer. We fundamentally were interested in three different things, as Rachel mentioned. Did you get the alert? It's the first question. The second is, have you heard of WIA before? And the third is whether or not they had opted out of any type of WIA alert in the past. The first question is really the primary purpose of the study. And we wanted to understand, first of all, who is WIA reaching? And one of the, I think, simplest and most fundamental results was that once we take into account, the sample and everything we took, our estimate is that 91% of adults with working cell phones receive the alert. That's a pretty remarkable reach for any system. And one of the real hallmarks of WIA is its ability to broadly reach a lot of people quickly. We were very interested in how that varied by what FEMA referred to as technical factors. Those are, what kind of phone do you have? Who's your carrier? Where are you? And things like that. How's the technical system working? And then finally, we asked questions about, it's fairly complex to figure out what phone somebody has, and what carriers they have. We also asked questions about the status of the phone while the alert was coming out. Were they on a phone call at the time? Was the phone turned on? You shouldn't receive the alert if the phone isn't turned on. Were you on Wi-Fi? The questions like that. We asked a number of demographic questions because we were interested in whether different groups differentially were receiving the alert better or worse, or more likely or less likely to receive the alert. And that was a whole range of things, everything from language spoken, to age, to what type, or whether their phone was received through a subsidy program like Lifeline. So we were interested in a number of those factors, and we looked at those 3 initial questions broken out by a lot of those different factors. Geography was a very important one, and one of the reasons that the sample was so large was because the U.S. is a very large place. And if you wanted to have coverage across most of that, you need to collect a very large sample. On average, we estimated about something around 25 people per county was what we were going for. Some counties obviously had many more than that in our sample. Some had much fewer numbers than that.
And how many people did you survey in total?
A little over 80,000 completed
80,000.
surveys, if I remember correctly. And it's so it's that, but there are, over 3,200 county equivalents in the U.S. So it's and we were careful when we were reporting results that we don't want to report results for areas that don't have too few responses in them, because those aren't reliable. So we spent some time thinking about how could we cluster counties that were often quite rural, that are close to, connected to each other geographically and had sort of similar profiles otherwise, so that we could say, okay, this area of North Dakota, for example, or otherwise. But if you're in an urban area, it was much closer, and we could say more. We could say more about smaller geographies.
It still seems
Andy,
like a
I
pretty big
remember.
sample size.
Oh, Eddie, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say
Eddie,
that's
I was
still.
going to
a
talk about that.
remarkably big sample size, and I sometimes still scratch my head as to the one thing that we did it, and that we were and that we were even, it was a good idea. I mean, I think it was in the end very important for FEMA to know the answers to this. I don't think all future studies would need to be that large. I think, but it is because of their interest in the geographic performance of the system. That was a particularly important element of this study, and we had to work pretty hard to get that size of a sample. We also worked pretty hard to oversample rural areas so that we could represent those a bit better, because by definition, there are fewer people there.
I think one thing to mention here too is collecting that many responses back. I think we received over half of the responses back within a few hours of the test. And so what you worry about a lot with surveys is, a recall bias is what we call it in academia. Is basically, will people forget, whether their phone was on or what kind of thing, what they've opted out of, and will they, have this recall bias. So we wanted to be able to immediately initiate the survey and start collecting those responses as fast as humanly possible. And I even remember early on in the design of the survey, we were like, should this be, an embedded link in the message where people can opt in? And we quickly went against that. We're like, we might bring down the system if everybody's clicking this link all at once. So yeah, there were a lot of lessons, I guess, learned in trying to do something at this scale that, yeah, we would be happy to share with people.
Imagine
Well, and I
hundreds of
think
thousands of people clicking on the same link at the same time. That was kind of a terrifying notion.
Well, that's definitely one that we've worked through in my work is, how many people can click on it at once for it to survive. And, but to help out, you talked about findings or results. Beyond just general correlation, what can we say from the results of the RAND study?
This is a really important question. The types of, this is what's called a correlational study, or what can be referred to as a correlational study. So primarily what we can say from this is statements like the rate of receipt was lower in rural areas. But we don't know, what we can't say is there's something specific about rurality that causes lower receipt. We know that they're associated with each other. There's a correlation between the two. Now, and that's an important limitation. Similarly, one of the sort of striking findings from the study was that the amount of opting out it was not evenly distributed across the country. Texas in particular had much higher opt-out rates. We need to be careful when we talk about that. That's an association. Now we could this kind of data is very important for generating hypotheses as to why there might be those relationships, and we have some good ideas for why we see those relationships. But stronger or different types of designs are necessary for establishing causality, like running experiments or longitudinal designs where you follow people over time and you look at what order of occurrence things happen. That said, there are still very important things that come out of a study like this, things that we can act on with respect to policy. We do know that receipt was lower in rural areas, so that might warrant extra efforts to try to bolster receipt or things that we see as barriers to receipt. One of the things we did know from the study is that older phones, lower feature phones, were less likely to receive the alert. If those are more common in rural areas, that's a program you could design to help improve the types of devices that people own. So just because it's a correlational study doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot to offer, but it is an important caveat here. These are if you want to think of it of preliminary in the sense that we would want to go in with other research designs to firmly establish that causation.
You said that virality was one of the things that was highlighted. Are there other things that are highlighted that you didn't mention that are like key correlations that we would want to think further about? Like Texas?
Yes, both on the positive and the negative.
Mm,
So older adults were less likely to report receiving the alert. That's concerning. We were very interested in the experiences of people with various types of disabilities or functional limitations. We found very little evidence that there were differences in receipt rate there. And in hindsight, there are some good reasons that might be the case. Many people with functional limitations actually use technology as tools to help, accommodate that. And sometimes they own the technology earlier, so they may have those newer, more higher feature phones, for example. So that was on receipt. We did see some other things. Like you mentioned opting out. Texas had a dramatically higher opting out rate than did other states. I think it was 5 or 6 times the rate of say Vermont, which was one of the lower opt out rates. And so begs the question of why. We do talk about this a bit in the report, and one of the hypotheses is that Texas is also one of the locations where one of the states that issues Amber Alerts statewide. There are a small number of states that do that, and you can imagine, and they also issue a fairly large number of Amber Alerts because it is a very large area. So there's one. If they're evenly speckled around, it's going to catch more of it because Texas is a big place. And if they're issuing them to the entire state, if you're in El Paso and you're getting alerts for Texarkana, that's something like 800 miles away. It may not feel so relevant. And if it's happening with some frequency, you can imagine that might cause fatigue with people and they might seek to opt out of the system.
hmm.
We like to compare the east-west distance of Texas as kind of equivalent to living in Virginia Beach and receiving Amber Alerts from Maine. It's quite a ways away. Another one that was particularly interesting, I think, and important is that we saw greater opt-out rates with people who owned iPhones. And one of our team members pointed out, Apple, when the alert pops up on your screen, actually gives you a link right there to the settings. So you can go right there and turn it off if you want. It makes it much easier to opt out in an Apple phone. And I can understand why they would want to do that for, facilitating something, a task that somebody might want to do. But it probably is making a difference in terms of the receipt of their customers of these types of alerts.
That's really interesting and really important insights also in thinking about the design of technology and how it's displayed on a phone, in addition to all the other aspects of things you were measuring. Um,
I I would point out also one very other important part of the design of WIA is that it is a volunteer partnership
mhm,
between the federal government, the carriers, and the device makers. And each company designs the system within certain specifications, designs it slightly differently. So WIA looks different on an Android than an Apple.
Yeah.
It performs a little bit differently on Verizon versus AT&T. And so that that's something I don't think people recognize either, is that those differences might matter.
mhm. Yeah, but we know that for it, it's Apple phones that if the instructions field is included in a message that's written by an alerting authority, those instructions fields will show up on an Apple phone,
Oh,
an iPhone, but they do not show up on an Android phone. And so that goes to thinking about alerting authorities recognizing the differences in how information is displayed beyond the 90 or 360 character message. And frankly, I think it's very confusing because there's a lack of training around those differences and how it looks. And also the software that's used for writing messages is a little confusing to work through. If you don't deal with it on a daily basis, it's not something that's really intuitive for a lot of people. So, all right. So, as we think about hypotheses and next steps, what kinds of hypotheses would you want to test?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first and then Andy, I'll pass it over to you.
mhm.
But I think one thing I'm hearing and recognizing too is that one of the key takeaways from the study is that it doesn't give, the one size fits all answer. The answer for Android isn't the same for if you have an Apple phone or if you're in a certain geographic area. But what it does help us do is narrow the question space a little bit and tell us where to look, which populations or groups may be more sensitive to certain alerting practices or where targeted testing or pilots could yield, real improvements. And in that sense, the study provides, an empirical foundation for smarter experimentation. So, at a high level, I'll touch on maybe two hypotheses that I would be interested in digging into more and excited about would be around, that over alerting and alert fatigue, hypotheses around those are very similar to hypotheses of early, human perception hypotheses. So that the way people experience over alerting isn't just like the alert volume, but how relevant is it? The credibility, the consistency. So all of the things that make up our human perception of like, how risky is this thing? Or how do I perceive, this option over that option, right? I think a lot of those factors that build or are the building blocks of our perceptions more generally are also the building blocks of what you could perceive as over alerting. That's sort of the extension of it. Because if it's not relevant, it's not credible, you're not getting them in a way that is consistent with your preferences or in alignment. I think that there's some relation there to be learned from the human perception kind of side. I do think that probably has something to do with why when you're seeing higher Amber Alert activities and higher opt-outs, again here correlational, but it suggests a hypothesis that repeated exposure without perceived relevance to you might increase your likelihood to opt out. And the other one is thinking about opt-out behavior, much like I do dose or signal response relationships. So in other words, people are exposed to a certain dose of alerts over time. And at some point, that exposure could lead to disengagement. So what's kind of the threshold that you could presume varies by some of these individual level characteristics, other preference, risk tolerances, amongst everything we've talked about, but you could imagine that there's these different factors that could be disentangled to show what's driving how sensitive people are to these signals and ultimately their decision to opt out.
Mhm. I love
I,
the proposals that you're making there. It's so similar to some of the questions that that Michelle Wood and I have been talking about with the qualitative work around how do we even define over alerting and warning fatigue. And we've we've investigated definitions, but what we need to do next is actually measure how it affects people's decisions to opt out. Because right now we have ideas, just like you have correlations. What we haven't yet done is tested these things empirically. So I love that our studies are all kind of coming together. We just need to figure out how to get it done. Andy, did you have any ideas of things you wanted to test next?
I'm interested in the same topics, honestly, but I think if we go beyond that a little bit, I think two things jump to mind. One is what's the trade-off between increasing the coverage of an alert and hence its efficacy in reaching a population, and the loss of efficacy due to opting out. So with the Amber Alert example we gave, you clearly, if you send it out to a larger area, you have a greater chance of catching the folks who really need to get the alert. At the cost of more people who don't need the alert getting it. And if some of those people who don't need the alert, don't see it as relevant, start opting out, you start to degrade the system. And so there's an inherent trade-off there in efficacy between the immediate reach and people participating in the alert system. And I think that trade-off, sort of trying to understand where the sweet spot is. What are strategies for taking advantage of one without costing the other? Those are interesting. That's an interesting one set of questions. The other one that really struck me has to do with access to the system, and where are there barriers to access that could be addressed. I mentioned the type of phone. More advanced, newer phones were more likely to receive the alert. That's something that'll be changing with time. Phones get more sophisticated as we go along. But there are other types of barriers we could see in the data, and it's suggestive of a larger set that are more about the person, their context, the place they live, than they are about the engineered system so much. And I think those are important questions to address here, and because I think access to the system is a really important. If this is doing a better job for some folks than for others, that's something I think we should be addressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the flip side, access to the system also is who has access to the ability to push those messages out, and the importance of training, so that when you think about those questions that you're raising about geographical reach versus very narrowly targeting, that goes back to issues of policy and procedure, and really thinking through some of these very key questions related to how severe the situation can be, and needing to move information very, very quickly, and having the skills and the strategies and the plans to do it when it needs to be done in the real life situation. I have one provocative question for the two of you, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Eddie to kind of wrap things up. One of our conversations we've had before was about how over alerting is defined, and talking about frequency or geography or relevancy. What are your thoughts on that 5 a.m. statewide alert that went out to Texas? Is that over alerting, or what dimensions of over alerting is it hitting on? And you know which one I'm talking about, right? That 5 a.m. blue alert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll jump in first, Andy, and then if you have other thoughts to add, please do. I think the short answer that everyone hates is it depends, and that context really matters. I think I'll speak more to a 5 a.m. statewide alert more generally rather than a specific case, but I think the dimensions remain largely the same. So over alerting, as you kind of mentioned, isn't just about timing or frequency, because what our study and others suggest is it's much more about what people judge as relevant, what's actionable, what has utility to me, in this moment. So I can imagine some, 5 a.m. alert that could be relevant, could be actionable, tightly targeted, to the state. And, that I could see the 5 a.m. alert that feels distant and non actionable and broadly scoped, and people experience that as noise. And that's where you might start to see things like opting out. But I think what I had talked a little bit about before, which is detecting what all of these signals mean and to whom and how that varies person to person. I think it also depends, like my preferences aren't static, they're quite dynamic, right? Like, so what might seem actionable to me today might feel differently if it's like when I'm on my way home to pick up my kids from school or, something like that. So I think there's a lot of, nuance and dimensionality here, but that isn't to say that you couldn't start to tease out some of those things with different experimental designs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks.
I think, I will emphasize trust and relevance and perceived trust and perceived relevance, I think are, particularly important here. And I'll also highlight something that I'm not sure. There are sort of well-established conditions for learning. When is something easier to learn? And I'm thinking about the alert originators here. And some of those conditions for learning have to do with prompt, unambiguous feedback. And I'm not sure that alert originators are getting that. They probably anecdotally are getting a lot of feedback, but it's probably not terribly systematic. There's not a sort of a pathway that's sort of set out to sort of make sure to capture this. So it's probably idiosyncratic whether or not that's useful or not, or how useful it is. I don't know what the answer to this is, but as you were both discussing this, it occurred to me that as an originator, I send something out and I wonder, was that just a mistake? Or was that well timed or well structured or something? Having a means of evaluating that performance would be really useful, even if that's just a set of carefully selected individuals who will give you feedback each time you send out an alert. I don't know. I haven't thought through this in a way that's not overly onerous. I'm not suggesting that every municipality needs to have a survey panel at its disposal. I'm thinking about something a little lighter touch that, but could at least provide feedback. I mean, one of the things that was remarkable in the psychology literature and early work around meteorology and weather forecasting highlighted that for certain types of weather forecasting, like whether it will rain tomorrow, weather forecasters are amazingly well calibrated. Contrary to all of our expectations, they are. If they say it's a 40% chance of rain, 40% of the time it will rain. And part of it is because they get very prompt, systematic, unambiguous feedback. And I'm not sure that exists here.
Mm-mm.
Well, I
I
can
don't
tell
think
you it
there's-
doesn't.
Yeah, there's not a good
I'm an alerting
mechanism.
authority. It doesn't.
Well, looking at you, Eddie.
Um,
I'm actually thinking of something like what USGS has for the Did You Feel It, where they've trained people that when you feel your earth shaking, you can enter information into the system to share like the kind of shaking you experienced. And that it's been in existence for so many years. It's kind of been socialized so people know. But I am socializing that nationwide so people can give feedback on the alerts they receive. I think when we first started looking at WIAs, a decade ago, we were trying to follow the traffic on social media. But unfortunately, what you see is the complaints and not usually people saying, I got it and it was great. It's, I got it and what the heck? So it's a little biased.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. And it's usually just the loudest voice, right? Or the one that knows how to project it. And I would love to have that type of feedback. There are the rare occasions when you get that positive feedback and It wasn't too long ago we sent out an alert for a missing teenager who had, different medical issues, and we were very concerned for his safety. After the alert was sent and we recovered the teenager, and again, we didn't hear much as far as that feedback, but then the family got on social media to say this was perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for all these
Wow.
different things. But that does not happen very often. So it'd be great to get some type of feedback, especially if you are drawing up a polygon and you're thinking, I'm sending it to this area. I would love to have more confidence that it is going to that area. And I'd love to know if we have bleed over, or, if we're going into areas that we did not initially intend to. But we currently
Let me
don't
give
have
you,
that.
now that I've had 3 more minutes to think about this. Let's draw an analogy to sensor networks. So weather, rain gauges speckled throughout the county, or for earthquakes, there are really well established sensor networks. Think of citizen scientists as a sensor network, and you've selected them in your catchment area around. I live in the Pittsburgh area, so we have lots of little tiny valleys. So when you're talking about signal and such, there's a lot of very important questions around where these alerts reach, and so you could imagine selecting folks in these things and just say, let's just have as a citizen science project, let's have every time an alert goes out, we ping them and say, did you get it? And what did you think of it? Or whatever you want. I mean, but I think you could set that up relatively simply. It wouldn't have to be costly, or it could be something as easy as an email chain, or as simple as an online survey form, that, and whatever, like a Google Forms kind of thing. And if if people are socialized to do that, it at least gets you a sense of what's going on there and what's working and what's not. And you can imagine augmenting that with all sorts of things, like what are you hearing from your friends?
No,
Yeah.
I think
Still
that's
on the
great.
weather analogy, I've been wanting to jump in to say, like, this is really cemented for me, because you think of the meteorologists having their role of, putting out the forecasts. And then you have storm spotters who are on the ground, people that are like really on fire. I was one of them. People that are really, on fire for, the weather, and reporting back, and there being a feedback mechanism there. And then in that same analogy, it's almost like the alert originators are the broadcast meteorologists, the people who say get information from the weather service, and they bring it down to their context with that local knowledge, that you can never get, at the federal level. So there's sort of this network that could be drawn from, of sort of feedback channels that I think would be really important for, risk communication, evaluation, and ultimately performance for the system.
I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to think about how do we gather that data. And I think some of the ideas that we've posed here today are potential good leads. It's exciting to think about.
I do too. I would say this, and then I have just one final question. Is one of our problems as alert originators, right? As we're sending it out, is my network of people that I would have to utilize would have to be educated as to what to expect. And so they can give me good data back. And I think right now, one of the hardest parts is just making sure the alert originators have an understanding of what these tools are. And so the public education and internal education is so important. And it's an area that we definitely need to keep moving forward on, because there's a big gap, which goes to this. So if you are listening to this and you have had to write down words like on my hand here that I will look up later as to what they mean, because I have a bunch of scientists talking on the podcast and you guys are all very smart. For those of us who are just learning, and maybe we haven't read the RAND study, I have, but for those that have not, what like as we talk about that quote unquote "so what" factor in this from the study, what do you think are the biggest takeaways that alerting authorities or originators can take from this to better apply their skillcraft and just to make them just better at this?
Yeah. So my first thought, and something Andy and I talk a lot about, and this is me trying to write it on your hand. So I'll try to keep that brief, which is recognizing that the public, so other stakeholders too, but I think the public is the one that doesn't get thought of in this way necessarily. But recognize that the public is or should be a partner or decision maker in emergency management, full stop. And I think once we start thinking of it that way, it's less about, I know we even talk about this as like, oh, educating alert originators or educating the public. And I think that's one side of the coin. And I think that if you flip that coin over, it's also about using the words like alignment. So knowing what the preferences are of the public, knowing what the alert originators are or are not using, or what polygons worked, and having those feedback channels to create better alignment between all of the stakeholders involved, I think is the so what of why this matters.
I think to reinforce that, it's important to know that there was another national test conducted like this in 2018. It was only after the fact that they realized that they didn't know if anybody received the alert because they hadn't paid attention to this link in the chain. And that was the motivation for doing this study initially, was because that was a gap in knowledge. And but I think it speaks to the fact that when we think of emergency management, we're often thinking about the professionals involved here. But the public is a very important stakeholder and a very important partner, I think, in this. And to reinforce what Rachel was saying, I think another so what here is what this study helps establish. It helps establish what WIA represents within a whole cluster of tools for emergency alert. It has very specific profile. It is fast. The messages are very brief. It covers a geographic area, and alerts everyone in that area whether or not they've signed up for anything. And it's very good for if you need to raise awareness of a situation. It's not so great at conveying nuanced information because the messages are so short, but it can lead people to that more nuanced information. As I mentioned earlier, it has very wide reach. By our estimate, 91% of the folks who could have received it did, they had a working cell phone. It is not universally understood. A third of our sample said they'd never heard of it before. So there's opportunities there for education and awareness building. And not everybody sees the value in it. We have a sizable proportion that were opting out of one or more parts of the system because it really wasn't. They didn't perceive that it was doing that the cost benefit wasn't coming out positive for them personally, and so they actually went to the trouble of digging through their settings and turning it off. And that's, I think those are all really important, sort of just kind of baseline findings. The fact that it is more effective in some areas than others, it is more effective for some people than others, or for some devices than others, are all really important as well, because those are things that we can work on. But I think we shouldn't shouldn't neglect the fact that it just helps us understand where WIA fits within this portfolio of alerting methods.
Well, then, can I just say, and again, Jeannette, I haven't asked you, but I always like to ask you live anyway, if I'm going to ask you some important question, because it puts you on the spot. I think we need to have a RAND part 2 podcast, because like some of the things that you mentioned there, if I had another podcast, which we do, I want to get into some of those statistics. I think they're very telling, and we look at some of the general results. But just as you said, a third of the people of your sample size didn't have an understanding of really what AWEA even was. That is mind blowing to me because it's one of the tools that I utilize. And for me to think what percent of my population may not have that working knowledge as to this tool that I'm relying on, it really helps me kind of focus where I need to put my public education or anything else. So if you guys are okay with it, Jeannette, if you give me a thumbs up, which I hope you're going to do, I would love to do kind of a part 2, and where we've talked broadly about the RAND study. And as a final plug, and again, I talk about if you're an academic or not, it doesn't matter. Go into this study because you are going to find things that will help give you that direction as a practitioner. Jeanette's heard me say it a lot. I hate having to rely on my own thoughts that are not based in research or studies or anything, because that puts a lot of pressure on me. If I can base it on things that have actually been looked at, even at a foundational level, that helps me be better and my program be better and ultimately my community safer. Um, I'd love to dig into some of that stuff if you guys are good.
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
Good. Well, that'll be exciting. I'd love to welcome you back in a near future podcast. And this was a great conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you
for
for having
having us.
So, and we are going to link the RAND study to this,
Mhm.
so that you guys will be able to, see it, read it, and please. And if you don't understand it after the first time you read it, that's okay. Hopefully you'll come back and listen, and we'll go through some of those specific metrics and things that have been looked at.
And
So-
Eddie and Jeannette, we could even link them right to, we have a shorter executive summary version that pulls out for all those that want the gory details of the methods and such. Head on over to the, huge report. But for those that, want kind of the high level takeaways, there's something about the fourth of a size in our executive summary that I think would be really useful for folks.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great conversation with Rachel and Andy. I really enjoyed hearing from them about their study, and we are posting their link in the information below in the podcast. So please take a look at the executive summary or the much longer report. The full-length report has all of the details in it, including the research methods and the statistics and the analyses, and it's a real wealth of information. If you want to know more about over-alerting and opting out and other parts of research on wireless emergency alerts, please take a look at thewarnroom.com, where you can find the latest. You can find the warning lexicon, the post-alert lexicon, and information on additional studies about over-alerting and opting out. We also want to let you know, remind you, that here at the Alerting Authority, our objective is to help you to do better at your alerting processes and procedures. And so please know that you can reach out to us. We are willing and able to provide training to your organizations, to your jurisdictions, to your regions, to your state. We've done this several times for other organizations across the United States, and we absolutely love spending time out in the field with practitioners, talking with you about what you do best. We also do message audits and template reviews, provide policy assistance, and in 2026, we have 2 new things coming. We're going to host warning boot camps. These are 5-day, 2 hours a day, intensive virtual training and workshop opportunities for you to complete your warning templates in a really short, fast period. It is a boot camp. I'm going to be a sergeant. And we're going to
Sorry,
start
that's
hosting.
so awesome. Okay, keep going. I love it. The drill sergeant Jeannette. I love it.
Drill Sergeant Doctor. And we'll also start hosting monthly alerting assistance exercises. So you can watch for those and sign up and join us and work through scenarios and practice becoming more proficient developing your confidence and your competence at the same time. And that will be with the cop.
And honestly, guys, just thank you for listening and participating. Again, you can go to thealertingauthority.com, thewarnroom.com, and just reach out, please, to us. Let us know what's happening. Please reach out. You're going to see some links shortly about how to sign up for all of these things happening in 2026. We want to connect with you, and we want to be a part of this. Just as we say every single episode on the Alerting Authority, we know that every second has a story, and your story is important, and we want to be there for when it happens so that we can help it really just be the best outcome possible. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.